Eric. They say it's lonely at the top, but guess what, my man? I got you, and we're stuck together.
That's right. I'd say it's lonely at the top, but not when you are there with someone else. And that's where we are, together. The purveyors, creators, and holders of all knowledge, unwilling to let go of it unless you subscribe to our podcast, which today, we're going to give some nuggets. We're going to, from on top, we're going to bend over and release nuggets onto our followers. That's right.
Yeah. No, it's, so, Eric, there's a lot to talk about, and you thought of this topic, so I'm going to let you lead. Before we do, there's just one thing I want to talk about, and that is the previous episode where we had the future powerlifting. We had a Bruce Crabshack, we had Jessica Bittner and Taylor Atwood on, said all three names correctly. Whew! Don't have to address that one. And my question to you is the following. Can you imagine being so strong that you forget your all-time numbers and actually think you lifted 20 pounds less, 20 or 30 pounds less, and it's not a big deal to you? So for the record, what the controversy is, Taylor Atwood, the 74 kg champ, the best to do it at 74 kg of all time, he hit a massive deadlift, and he thought, he was like, I think it was about 750, maybe less. I knew from watching the post, because I'm Myring, okay? I have that silent jealousy. I'm kind of like, hey, congratulations, bro. And secretly, I'm asking myself, like, what do I have to do to pull this weight? It was 770. Can you imagine being that strong, my man, that you can't even remember your own damn PRs, and they're not even important? You know why they're not important, Eric? This is the scary thought. I had the epiphany last night. It's because he knows he's going to break it again. So it's not even a PR. It's like a pit stop along the way.
The answer to that question is that no, I can't imagine it, because I always convert what I do in my piddly little kilos to pounds. So when I bench a 150, I'm thinking, oh sweet, 331. I don't round down.
No,
I don't round up.
Yes,
I
yes,
might round
sir.
up if you don't know, but if I think you might know, then I'll keep it where it is. But I'm keeping those pounds, right? But yeah. I was doing the math while he was talking about it. I was like, that doesn't sound right. He was like, all right.
8
we
plates,
went from
Eric.
585. Then we went, 7 plates. I was like, all right, that's 675. Add 90 again. All right, that's 765. How did he get to 750? Oh, then he chucked the 2.5s on because Dad's like, why not? They're pretty sure that's 770.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
And he's like, 750, 720, whatever.
Oh,
I don't know.
Man.
Doesn't
Imagine
count anyway.
shortchanging yourself by 50 pounds, Eric. Like, no.
Well, when you drop 50 pounds off your deadlift and you're still pulling 720 at a body weight of 166, why not, right?
So that is a lesson, and that is a microcosm right now, Eric, of ourselves, a lesson to us and to the audience to never be humble, because it doesn't pay. He was wrong. He clearly lifted more weight, and now, unless we brought it up to defend Taylor, no one would know how great he is, and that's a shame, because everyone should know how great you are.
Yeah, I basically think that, well, if I was to reinterpret what you just said, it sounds like you're saying that Taylor Atwood owes all of his success to us.
Yeah, we're at the top, my man. We're at the top.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's that's a fair reconstruction. I would call it not only a reinterpretation, it's a reinvigoration of what I said. It's improvising up top. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you doubled down on that. So you heard it here, folks. Omar Isuf claims, and you can please make this well known to Taylor, that all of his success is due to us talking about it on Iron Culture and accurately portraying his deadlift, which he, honestly, video, pics, or it didn't happen. So I'm going to go ahead and say podcaster didn't happen. So if you say you deadlifted 750 on Iron Culture, guess what? And you actually deadlifted 770, you just lost 20 pounds off your deadlift. It'll get changed in open powerlifting.
Yeah. We have that influence.
Do not contact open powerlifting to confirm that statement. Just assume it to be true.
Now, Eric, this is the perfect jumping off point, because some folks, any language has a method of communication and understanding the subtext of what one is trying to say to another person. And both of us happen to be content creators, okay? You have the PhD, you are educating students, you are doing research, you are affecting change on a massive level, both in the ivory tower, but amongst the people. And both of us are united atop that pyramid, trying to affect that change by communicating the research, communicating the training practices, and essentially just trying to help people out. And you wanted to give a peek behind the Iron Culture curtain, not the Iron Curtain, because again, why do I feel the need to defend us? Because you know what it is, we have haters. It's not the Iron Curtain. We joked about the name Critiques of Capitalism. We're accruing and accumulating wealth collectively, and by collectively we mean between us, betwixt us, and no one else. We don't believe in the redistribution of wealth whatsoever. We don't even believe in public amenities.
I mean, all you need to understand is that if you read between the lines and listened to what Omar was saying, I actually managed to build a pyramid on top of an ivory tower against all engineering and architectural advice, and them explaining for that to even be remotely structurally sound, I would need to spend a egregious amount of money, not only in building it, but also in paying off public health safety inspectors, which I've done. And I even tipped them, which you're not even supposed to tip on bribes. So, fine.
Yeah.
And I flaunted it. You know, I actually made sure that people showed up and saw that. So, don't believe the haters, folks. Anyway, to get onto the topic at hand, I pitched this as like you said, Omar, giving a little bit of a look behind the curtain. And I think you brought this up on the last episode to go back to that roundtable we just had with those very strong people. And you mentioned how Jess, for example, has like a real job that's actually stressful right now. And then you made the joke that what do I even do? I'm just a content creator, which I think it's funny, but I also think it's a little bit disingenuous because you do a great service, my friend. One thing I was saying before we hopped on was that I love that if you look at your YouTube channel, you can find the videos you made all the way back in 2010. And you're not necessarily proud of all that content. You've definitely learned and grown and improved since then, but you allow people to see that journey. And one of the things that I think most of the time is true is that when you actually give a recommendation on your channel, even going back 5-10 years, rarely is it something that you look at and go, actually, that was just flat out wrong. And I think that's impressive to me because I know that you aren't, you described me as Mr. PhD in the ivory tower. That's not you. But you do have a very discerning mind. You are able to evaluate information. You have both common sense and critical thinking. And I think more important than both of those, you have a really good read on people. Not just people like, hey, this person is a good scientist, maybe not a good science communicator, or this person may be a little too far up their own biases, but they're very intelligent. But also you have a really good read on what people would benefit from hearing and how do they need to hear it. And I think while we are both, quote unquote, content creators, if you will, I think we occupy different ends of the spectrum in the same space. And I know that I've learned from you a lot just in how to communicate better and what level of depth I need to give, and then to have a better conceptualization in my mind's eye when I speak, okay, who's the audience for this topic or this episode or what I'm being asked right now? While I think previously I didn't have that skill set. And I think a lot of people who are, like you said, coming from the ivory tower, who are embedded in academia, they kind of just go, you know what, my stuff's at this level. It requires this kind of, entry fee. You got to have at least this baseline level of knowledge. You also need to be interested in the nuance of this thing, whether or not it's important. You got to kind of be down with the science for science's sake. And then you can understand my content. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think a lot of people, they retreat to that, not because this is what they like to do and that's their plan, but because they acknowledge that they don't know how to shore up that weakness. And they go, well, all right, well, I'll just fall back on and rest on my laurels. So I don't know what you think about that.
There's so much to unpack there. Eric, you're too damn kind. And just know that Eric's background, if you're only listening to the audio, I'm attempting to move my body so my head is in fact over where I would be. So we're connected to standard. Us, the props, the eternal propsing each other forever and ever in that photo where our souls remain. So I think there is a lot to talk about because most likely if someone's listening to this, and that's why I think there's a lot to give away to those that are listening. Even if you don't see yourself as a content creator, you're attempting on some level to communicate either to other individuals the knowledge that you have. You're trying to empower them so they could better understand, or maybe you're just like, you know what, this guy's a loser, he's incorrect, let me drop that science on them. But I think there's different levels of communication, either person to person or person to group, and most people aspire towards some sort of job in the fitness industry. So maybe a personal trainer, maybe you're just a lifter that wants to be able to communicate their journey. And that's why, giving a shout out to Taylor Atwood, one of the things I really appreciated, because we've been around for such a long time, we know the tricks, right? And what I mean when I say the tricks, we are well aware of the masks that we wear on social media and what other people do. So if you're an elite level lifter, you're only posting about the best lifts, and you basically kind of want to scare your opponents, where it's like, I'm always looking good, I'm always ready for game day. Because when it comes time to then compete, they're thinking, oh shit, like Taylor or Russ or whoever, they're ready to squat 800 pounds, and it throws them maybe off their game. So there's a whole lot of calculations that go on behind the scenes. Being a content creator, I think both of us are united first by having real on-hand, in-person experience, which I think is a differential factor when you consider social media. And what I mean, we both trained individuals, we trained people in person. And so you immediately become attuned to what someone actually needs. So they might ask a question, but what's the question they're really attempting to ask? And we were in that situation when we first started off, where you want to answer all the questions, right? And that was, I would say, if I erred in one way massively when I first started off, because you see the amount of pain someone's in, you see they're not where they want to be, the frustration. And it's not a rent-a-friend situation, but you want to attempt to try and fix them, as you want to attempt to try and help them. And you think, okay, like nutrition, training, they're, Eric, their knee's a little bothered, what can we do? So there's a lot of things that occur. And so one, we could see what happens with fellow content creators. But two, I think you and myself are united in that we have in-person experience, an extensive in-person experience. It's not just that we train people for, a few months, a few years. If I had to add it up, probably, because I was working 60 hours a week for over a handful of years, training hours, that's thousands of hours, right? So you have to learn how to communicate with someone. And just before I go on with what I'm going to say, I'd be remiss if I don't return the compliment. And not merely because you gave me a compliment, but I think one of the things, what I knew, so when this podcast actually came to be, was when you came down to Toronto, that photo right there behind you, and we put the camera on you. And I've had to do this so many times with either those in the ivory tower, so those in academia, or just other fellow content creators. The most egregious, can I say, Eric, are fellow content creators. They're terrible on camera, where I'm thinking, man, like, what are you doing? It's kind of like you're running a statistical analysis, and you just make, when it comes to the confidence intervals, just a glaring error that anyone that takes a look at it's like, Eric, like, dude, what? Like, you didn't even review this data? And Eric's like, I kind of slept in last night. Haha. It's like, no, that doesn't hold up. So it is actually almost offensive to me when a content creator's not good on camera. But I think from your experience training people in person, that you're far ahead of the average science communicator, because you have the in-person experience. Additionally to that, you have the science-based knowledge, so the research, and then you understand, okay, what do I need to say, and what language do I need to try and say this so they can understand it? And I think that's super important, because there was someone, and I'll keep this anonymous, someone, let's say, in the evidence-based space, that basically said, and I'm going to paraphrase, that if you can't understand what I'm saying, it's not an error in terms of how I'm communicating with you, is that you just don't understand enough. You need to level up your knowledge. So it's not a me problem, it's a you problem. Wow, ownership 101. And it made me think for a second, where I'm trying to think of the physicists. It may have been Feynman. It may have been, maybe honestly, it could have been Einstein. But if you can't communicate something simply, you can't communicate it at all. It's like, if an astrophysicist is saying essentially you can't communicate to the layperson, at least the general concepts, bro, if we're talking calories in, calories out, do you really think it's more complicated than us attempting to understand a black hole? So I think that's a little bit of ego, but I think it also takes empathy. So I want to give that respect back to you. I think that is why it was such a natural fit for me to want to do this with you, where I knew we could just riff off things. I knew we could have guests. I knew you could then take whatever someone's saying. So we bring on someone from a science space that might even be adjacent to something that you studied, right? So it might be, let's say, gut health. Right, we take on someone from. Where it's like, did you study that? No, it's like, but you understand? Okay, let me attempt to communicate this back to our audience. So that's powerful, man. So first, I got to give huge respect to you. I think what I noticed from the inception of attempting to produce content was always being mindful of who I was trying to communicate with and what the intended function was. And maybe that's what it was, because I think I came from a personal training space. I was always attempting to communicate with people that had specific goals. And so you'd run into similar problems. And you would attempt to explain these things, Eric, as I'm sure you can also relate to, 5, 6, 20, 30, 100 times. So if someone needs to squat, right? And they need to have the concept of balance. So the barbell, where is the center of mass? Like, what's going on here? And you could say like, hey, open up your hips a little bit. You could try different cues. You could try different terminology, different ways. So you upgrade the technical prowess of what you're attempting to say, or you could downgrade it. You could change some of the cues that you're attempting to give. And so it's all feedback that you're internalizing over time. And often what I found is that if you can clearly communicate in an effective way that is easy to understand and for them to internalize it, it's far more effective than just wowing them. Because there were those trainers, it's like, oh, I just took the latest whatever physical therapy course or what have you. Let me just knowledge dump your ass. And the person thinking like, wow, that's very impressive. And that's just circle jerking right there. Because the person, when it comes bars on their back, time to squat, are they a better squatter? And I think at the crux of it, what I always at least attempt to do, so I think you got to start with what are you attempting to do, is to move the ball forward. Like, is what I'm saying going to help in some sort of tangible way, either in a movement, either in terms of habit, in terms of maybe personal experience of myself, of errors that I made that would save you time. And so from that kernel comes everything else. And I think before I give it over to you, I'm a naturally curious person. It doesn't matter what I try and do, that I want to attempt to understand it a little bit more. We spoke about that actually when we met up in Toronto, that humans in general crave complexity. So I had no interest in attempting to get into research or any of those things as it relates to fitness, but I want to know more, right? I don't want to know the superficial level. And once you know level 1, you kind of want to learn level 2, level 3, level 4. And there does come a point where the question becomes, are we getting granular for the sake of it being merely interesting intellectually, but in terms of the net outcome on a person, it won't actually move the ball forward? Okay, then what are some other ways? Well, in terms of content, how can I shape the content so it's more digestible? And that's why I give a shout out to people like an Alan Thrall or Jeff Nippert as an example, where you could take the content and take all this familiar information, repackage it in a way that people can better absorb it and they're better off for it. So I think there's a lot as a content creator that you experience over time. And I think what's neat about you, man, is that you've been the trainer, you've been the coach, you've been on other people's channels before starting your own thing, us doing Iron Culture, 3DMJ, where you were a guest. Like, you were a frequent flyer, you know what I'm saying, Eric? Like, you're a frequent guest on a few channels. So you had that exposure and you gave yourself the regular exposure. So you were still tethered to what I would call reality. So the everyday experience of people, as opposed to just, I'm in academia, I want to talk about these things. Is it really going to make a difference for the average person? No. Is it interesting to be interesting? Sure. So it's kind of weird how all our strands connect. And while I would agree with you, I would say for sure there is a spectrum for us. There's a spectrum that exists outside of us that is like, we're in that bubble, let's say like the knowledge bubble. So it's mass communication versus, amongst maybe academics. And then outside of that, it's like there's the fitness space where knowledge is a slice of that. And then it's about culture. It's about identity. It's about all these other things. So it's trying to wrap those into one neat little package.
I think that's well said. And to give you some build upons on what you said, it wasn't Feynman, was Einstein.
It was,
and so you got that right on revision. And I think the actual quote at least it's attributed to Einstein.
Sure.
Pretty much everything.
It could be apocryphal, but
yeah, I think this one is actually like a quote of something he said in person. But it is, if you can't explain something in simple terms and you don't know it well enough, it's essentially the paraphrase.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, ironically, that you brought up Feynman, is that Feynman has, in some interviews, drawn a relatively hard line in the sand, saying, look, if you don't define some constraints, then in physics, you can keep explaining to a level that most people can't understand. So I think some of this does come down to knowing your audience. And I'm thinking of a specific Feynman interview where he was asked basically like, why is ice slippery? And he was like, that's a far more complex question than you think it is. It almost sounded like he was cranky in the interview, but he was like, look, we could keep going and keep going and keep going. Like, do you understand friction? Do you understand how heat and cold interacts with that, et cetera, et cetera? And so the funny thing is that I think there's actually a better Einstein quote which explains the interaction there. Because if you just take that Einstein quote in a vacuum, you could be like, well, that's not always true. Some things are inherently complex. And I think the other Einstein quote, supposedly, again, attributed to him, but may or may not actually be, is that you want to make something as simple as possible, but no simpler. And I think that comes back to exactly what you were saying, which is you need to know your audience. So if I'm going to be talking to other academics, like if I'm at an academic conference, they're going to want to understand the mechanisms and the prior research that was done on it, and what do we not know, and what are potential alternative mechanisms if this is just an applied study and we just looked at outcomes. We didn't actually measure changes in hormones or changes in muscle damage, et cetera. And I need to be aware of that. So the way I speak to people at an academic conference, where it's a room full of people who are probably more intelligent than me, but just doing different lines of research, is very different than when I speak about resistance training to a audience of powerlifters. Is very different when I speak to an audience of bodybuilders or people who are recreational but serious lifters. And I think that is something that you do a very good job of. And you mentioned it. As you're reflecting, you were like, "Hey, I think one of the things that's led to my success is that, or at least continued progression. Well, I see a lot of people who get worse over time. Is that I know who I'm speaking to and I know what I'm trying to help them do." And I know people talk about mission statements and know your audience a lot, and it may almost sound cliche. And people are thinking about titles and how do I get the best filters and how do I get the best Google AdWords and all the things, SEO, all the other things that are going to get you a lot of eyes on you. But I think that all needs to, even though it is cliche, come down to the center core foundation of what is your message and who are you saying it to. Because without that, I think you do talk past people, you do struggle to gain a foothold, and you do end up following the winds of what you think people want rather than actually producing things that might push them in the right direction. Because anyone who's been in the fitness industry knows that what is currently trendy or what people are currently talking about may or may not be accurately represented or helpful. And often it's not. And if you follow that, you end up basically adding flames to fanning the fire of what might be harmful instead of producing a voice that might make people aware of things they should maybe be spending their time and effort and money on instead of whatever is the trend. So anyway, I don't think it's easy to do that. I don't think it's easy to, I'll put it this way. I do think it's easy to identify your audience and figure out how you want to help them. I think it's difficult as you grow and as you experience the pressures of life, as you realize that you tried to become a content creator or do the online fitness thing too early and you're not making any money. I did that. I had to basically go back to work as a personal trainer in 2011. After 2010, I was like, I'm just going to do the 3DMJ thing. I'll write my blog. I'll coach my people online. And then I was like, oh yeah, so my mortgage, so, and then having to go back and then finding out I just started, I just got a little too eager. So the realities of life are difficult. And I think especially if you start as a content creator who is emulating other content creators, you may not be aware that when they began, they started in a very different position than you. And they often don't acknowledge, which I like what we're doing right now, the roots of what enabled them to get there. and that they came up in a very different like social media era. Like I'm not confident talking about some of the X's and O's of what is good for marketing or building a blog or building a YouTube channel or honestly even building like a research review, because the landscape has changed so much every couple years, that I know how to make the value there, the content good, and the directionality, which is what we're talking about, of what you do of a high quality. But past that, the rest is going to be something you kind of have to keep your focus on. But it never becomes more important than that core foundation. So to echo what you said, you definitely have to know who you're talking to, why you're talking to them. And then if you plan on having a non-niche audience, which could be defined based on who you're talking to. But if we talk about kind of the bubble that we're in, the knowledge bubble, I do have a different set of constraints that I put on myself than you do, Omar. Like I often remind myself that I am speaking to people who are trying to push themselves to their limits in competitive sport. I always remind myself I'm not Joe Fitness personality. I am trying to serve competitive drug-free athletes primarily. And where that can help others, because I try to take a more holistic approach and think about their psychology, long-term health, relationship with their food and their body, rather than just, what's the best periodization scheme or best manipulation of macros, and then let your psychology figure out how to be optimal. Because I know that doesn't work as a coach. Because of that, I do have some dovetails into working with more of a quote-unquote general population lifter. I never pretend to be someone who is just about helping the everyday person. Like I think you mentioned me as a frequent flyer. Like I think Jeff Nippert, for example, does a much better job of approaching anyone who just is thinking about lifting weights and doing so with an evidence-based approach. And I'm a guest on his channel. I haven't created my own channel like that. That's not what Iron Culture is. It is for lifers, as we've talked about a lot. And we understand that people who listen to our podcast are down to hear me talk about protein for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So there are certain constraints that I apply, and I will only dumb things down, quote unquote, which I think is a disrespectful way of saying it, but I think you know what I mean.
Yep.
To go back to the Einstein quote, I will make things as simple as possible, but only as simple as they should be for my audience and what they're interested in. And if I really wanted to retreat into, like I talked about what you shouldn't be doing earlier, if I wanted to retreat into my comfort zone, it would actually be more complex than it is, rather than less. I find it actually far more difficult to make the information I know relevant to a broader and broader audience. So I do have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, and I think everyone needs to. You have one as well. It's just in a different position and a slightly different audience. You don't brand yourself as, hey, come to me if you want to learn about competitive natural bodybuilding. If you're a serious lifter, you're interested in strength, and also you want to get big. And by the way, we can learn from these competitors, and there are some competitors who follow me. However, you want to talk about competitive natural bodybuilding? I got this guy on, or I got this gal on. You want to talk about, yeah, exactly, right? So I think that's something I've always appreciated about you, is that you're very comfortable with knowing your limits, and you are great at putting people on. Like you will have champions of sport who are good communicators and have some kind of lesson to give, like the compliment you gave Taylor Atwood, that you love his IG, because it's not just that I'm going to protect my own identity as a lifter, or I'm trying to psych out other lifters and let them think that I can always deadlift 800 pounds on a random Tuesday, but rather you think Taylor's, and I agree with you, that his social media has value and that it helps people understand what goes into that type of performance, and also what goes into much lower levels of objective performance, but that are still very difficult to attain for someone who is maybe not as gifted. That those lessons apply regardless of what your top end might be, regardless of whether you chop 50 pounds off your deadlift and you're still a world-class deadlifter, or if you chop 50 pounds off your deadlift and you've got an empty barbell. So it still applies.
Eric, so it's funny. We're bigging up Taylor's Instagram. Got to give a shout out to another frequent flyer of the cult, Natalie Hansen actually recently shouted out Taylor's IG, saying it's an IG like today on Instagram, saying it's an Instagram account I enjoy following, because I think anyone that competes or is really about this life, they could see, and I will use that word, authenticity. So this is more similar to one's training journey, the week to week, what it would look like, than what we typically see online. I do want to say something very quickly, because we almost would have that survivorship bias potentially, where if we don't take into account some of the failures, where you said at the start, it's so far, like our timelines are pretty similar. And Eric, look at this. I'm damn near wearing the same shirt as that photo 3 years ago. We're just, the similarities are too damn strong. We said 2010. A fun fact that most people don't know, and I've said this before, that basically reading Black Swan by Nassim Taleb is what motivated me to start essentially a YouTube channel, because there's power in scale and size. There's more security, and also the idea of being on social media, even on YouTube, it was like the Wild West, was far more stable than just being an in-person trainer. But when I started, so before I started personal training, I was doing a double major. I was studying economics, cool, whatever. I went to the gym, and it was the head of the kinesiology department. That was a super cool guy, Adam. I was just training there, and he would see me there all the time. And I was working as a bartender server, and he said, hey, like, you ever thought about being a trainer? Cool, whatever. Ways lead on to ways. And from there, he said, hey, why don't you show up for the football team coaching? Like, he was very cool like that. Like, hey, why don't you just observe, help out a little bit? So to integrate myself more with some of the athletes, the volleyball team, this and that, because he knew, coming from a little bit of a sprinting background, just basically liking the move, that it would be of interest to me. So I thought, yeah, like, I'm going to become a trainer, and this might be a potential route. So much so, Eric, that when I came back, so that was in Windsor, another city, I came back to Toronto for the summer. I had branded myself, when I started training at a big box gym, an athletic trainer, and that's the route I wanted to go. Like the certifications I was looking at, all these things. And what ended up happening, like, people think, oh yeah, like, like, you guys, you made it, like, Eric, like, you got your PhD, decorated bodybuilder, like, all these accomplishments. It's like, I actually failed hard when I started first as a trainer, because the niche wasn't there, and I had to quickly retool who I was communicating for, because my passion wasn't exactly what was putting food on the table. And so that was a stark realization. It's like, oh, Omar, you love this stuff. You want to talk about explosive training or this, that, the other thing. Guess what? Your average clientele, they're 45, their knees hurt, they're just trying to lose 30 pounds, and you're not going to get the audience that you're seeking. One, you haven't put in the requisite time, but also in terms of size and scale, in person at your random big box gym in one small segment of the city, it's not going to happen. So it was that when you talk, talking now of financial considerations, Eric, that the financial consideration did cause a major retweaking of who I was trying to communicate with, and who I was trying to communicate for. Interesting enough, when I started the channel, it was a little bit more general, still taking into account content I wanted to make, but then the scope had widened considerably, where due to that, the idea of the size and scaling, the potential within social media, you can affect a lot more people. And even if you wanted to do training, if you get viewed by 10,000 people, let's say that's 10,000 more people if you're then getting by 0 people. And if you have a very niche audience, the hope with the niche audience is that they're super dedicated, so they'd be willing to pay for your services, so you can transact business. Even though it's a smaller niche, it's a more hardcore niche, so there's a higher percentage of people that want to work with you. Mm-hmm. I decided to go for the mass market approach, because I was burned in that experience of in-person training, where it's like, you know what, there are levels to this, and you're able as a general trainer, so for body recomp or getting a little stronger, accumulate a little bit of muscle, what have you, great success. The other one, not so much. So you kind of get slapped on the wrist where you realize, oh, okay. And then over time, and people once again don't understand this, same idea with you with 3DMJ, is that I actually had a real job, so still was training, had strength classes for women here in Toronto up until basically 2013 to 2014. So that was at least 5 years. And so that was the first 4 or 5 years of content. I was working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And then on the side for fun, because I knew there was that potential for scaling within YouTube content creation. And once it became more of a full-time thing, that's when I got more serious about the content I was producing, because then I could take the time to read some of the research reviews or just listen a little bit more. Because you know this, Eric, that sometimes when you're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, you don't have that time to digest the new information that you're attempting to learn. So you have your old bag of tricks, and that's it. That's all you have. And so I knew it was necessary to upgrade. And I think what we're united in is the attempt to always refine the process, the skills that we're showcasing here. So knowledge on my hand, and then for yourself too. I don't think there's really any refinement necessary, but let's say communicating to then potentially a mass audience, from going from academics, or then also going from the more hardcore to the more general. So as you said, if on a Jeff Nippert video, it's going to get 1 million views, that's a different way you need to communicate than if it's for the mass crew. So the several thousand people that subscribe to monthly applications in strength sports, which everyone should do. Greg Knuckles, Mike Zordos, Eric Trexler, and Eric Helms. Go ahead and check it out. Mass, M-A-S-S. Just search that, Eric Helms. It's going to pop up. It's fantastic. But that's several thousand people, and then there's almost 1 million people. So that's a scaling that occurs right there in terms of the language that you use. One of the things that I would say that I think you touched on that I need to highlight, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of this, when you said the landscape, my man, has changed. Because we're talking now about the origins, we're talking about like little jokes, that survivorship bias, like some of the errors of the past. When you started 10 years ago, there's no one, Eric, to emulate, where you're like, I'm going to start 3DMJ. It's like, oh, what's another super successful natural bodybuilding coaching company at the time?
Well,
like,
we had, I mean, this is actually funny, because I remember our first meeting where we decided to take on clients, and we were like, well, what are the pricing like? What else are people charging right now? And it was the shortest meeting ever, because I got out my computer and I looked up Lane Norton, and Berto got out his and he looked up Joe Klimaszewski, and that was it. So we were like the number 3 we were aware of.
Yeah.
But you're totally right. The landscape does change rapidly. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in that. But to your point, that you were a trainer working full-time, if not full-time plus, for the first 5 years, you were a content producer. I think that's doing it right. And I think a lot of people try to kind of fast track that. And if you can, and you can do it well, awesome. But I think more often than not, people find themselves in a position where they have the platform, but they don't have the other skills we've talked about, which are really what you want the platform for. So it's kind of that getting the cart before the horse. Omar, I got 2 questions for you, because I'm intrigued in how you've landed on kind of the style of what you do, and the success and the high quality of it. The first question.
One quick thing, my brother.
Yes.
You son of a gun. You looped me into this. I said this is going to be about us, and now he's just asking me He knew, because I said, Eric, I don't want to just talk about myself. And now he's going to you ask me these questions, then I'm going to ask you some questions. So go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm not going to let you Canada this 100%. So you're going to have to talk positively about yourself. So the first question I have, we're both aware of some of the, I would say, fitness entertainment channels are out there that are awesome. That don't get me wrong, I enjoy it. Like Bro Science Life, Juji Mufu. Don't get me wrong, I love them. They're super, super fun, and I think they are great for being entertainment. But neither one pretends to necessarily be something different than that, right? And I will say that you are very entertaining, but you have not made yourself an entertainment channel. You've had a few skits here and there, but they're the exception rather than the rule. Have you ever found yourself not sure where that balance is, and how much of that you wanted to do, and curious about whether you should go more down the entertaining information versus entertainment with bits of information here and there?
So, Eric, I'm about to erode the reputation I have, because I will say now publicly, we'll see what happens, but myself and my boy, Jeffrey Nipples, it seems like we might be entering the old TikTok space, because guess what? We see the people that are basically our grandkids, and I'm going to say this, because every single meme, it's just like you. Man, you've been here 2010, 2007. When I started Team No Calves, that's 2012. That's the first hashtag. So and there's a guy, this is hilarious, just as an aside, who started a clothing, not a company, but the main thrust of the apparel, Team No Calves. And I don't even think he's aware where the slogan comes from, right? Like where, like the origins of it. So myself and Mr. Nipples are like two grandparents seeing their grandkids attempt to do our skits on the talk of things that we thought of or that we mentioned. Or I even saw someone talking, about kiwis. I'm like, man, Jeff clearly made kiwis a thing in the fitness space, one being Ernest and then turning it into a meme. Anyway, so follow me back in a year from now where I'm going to say all this lofty shit and it's not going to hold up to scrutiny when you see me just dancing while trying to communicate information to appeal to millions of basically prepubescent teens. So the sellout is imminent, and everything I say should be taken with a grain of salt. There is a balance. I think it's within the greater context, however. So I think it's fun to show a little bit of personality, and Iron Culture is history, science, culture. So that is partaking within the culture, and it's understanding the memes within that culture and managing to communicate in such a way that people can understand it, joke about it. So as an example, the Rascal Apparel, the number one selling tee currently is the all pain, no gains, because everyone's like, that's me. All right. And we all are on that journey, because the subtext of that is that we want to be further along than we are, but we aren't. And there's this battle internally of not whether or not to continue or whether or not it's worth it. It's like, why am I even here? Like, why am I even lifting this weight? Because you know what? I thought I was going to squat 500 pounds. 7 years later, I'm still doing 315 for like 8 or 10 repetitions. What's going on? And I think social media amplifies that. I think, Eric, that there is that balance, and you got to know what you're producing. I think some of the more comedic skits or some of the ideas, and what's funny, one of the ideas for us when we met up in person next, when we would have, should have, could have last year, was actually going to be a skit, like the one I was right, where it's like the coach, and I won't say too much because I think one, you would crush it. It's within the greater context of the whole. If I feel that we're putting out, so man, you dropped some knowledge bombs on that leg training video we had. It was like 20 minutes long when 2 years ago at Untamed Strength. You put out a video like that, that's a whole lot of information for people to digest, to watch, rewatch, share. So that's really good. I feel really good about that content because it has a lot of substance to it, right? There's a lot of meat and bones where people can take it. It can make them a better lifter. So I think the core of the channel's always there. But if you want to let loose, to show a little bit of personality, show that we're hip, that we understand things, and then also to elevate the form, so to speak, because I think there are ways, if you've been in this life for such a long period of time, you could say certain things that can almost crystallize a thought that people have been thinking, but they couldn't verbalize it, right? So there is value to that. And I think Juji Mufu, Bro Science Life, they're partaking within the culture, and that works in the greater, in my personal opinion, context of there being channels that are more informative. So if that was purely the landscape, so basically just being satirical, cynical, and joking about things without saying anything substantial that would help anyone out, that to me, I would kind of groan, because I'm thinking, okay, like that kid, that boy or girl that wants to get better, if they are partaking on social media, are they actually going to get better at training then? And as long as the answer is largely kind of yes, or even their self-worth, that's why, a lot of the photos, I took those shirtless photos or whatnot. It's like, hey, kind of normalizing how one's body looks at any point in time in their journey. It's okay, and being comfortable with that, because there was that pivotal moment 7 years ago where there's a bodybuilder for a skit I wanted to do, and he had agreed 3 months beforehand, but he went on a bulk, and I think he had a show and it didn't go well, and I'm not trying to slam him here, but he, on the day of filming, he was probably 20 pounds heavier than what he had anticipated 3 months prior, and he was entirely uncomfortable taking his shirt off, even if it wouldn't have his face in it, so he wouldn't be able to recognize his face, because we needed basically just some bodies for this one particular skit, two bodies to be specific, and he didn't want to, and he was entirely uncomfortable showing off his physique, and that kind of just made me realize, oh my gosh, like this goes deeper. So to answer your question, I think it is completely fine in the greater whole, as long as it's maybe not everything, and even if it is everything, as long as there's other people, I take a look at the landscape, I'm like, man, they're really putting out good information there. I could ease the seat back a little bit. I could remove some of that pressure. So when I see things like Mass out there, when I see things like other people putting out great information, it allows one, I think, to get even looser, because you think to yourself, okay, within our little bubble, people are getting served, right? They're getting that knowledge they need, and that's okay then.
No, that's well said. I think there's a lot of, I really appreciate that perspective, and to know what goes on in the calculus of how you assess the whole landscape. and where you see satire and entertainment to sit. Because you're right, you can't have satire without what's being satirized. So yeah, I think that's really helpful, and it doesn't sound like you've ever not known where you sit, or at least you don't not know now, which is clearly a straightforward grammar construction. Second question, as I said, there would be two.
No, I'm waiting for it. Then I'm asking you questions, Eric.
All right. Okay, so that's how you're dealing with it. Okay, got it.
This is how I'm coping with it, bro.
Second question I have is, as a sciencey dude, which I'm comfortable calling myself, I have always been impressed with the information you put out on your channel, because rarely do I think, oh, got that one wrong, if ever. Let me ask you, how do you vet the information and the people that you put on? Because I know as a non-scientist, it can be very challenging to do that. And there are many people who are science-based who aren't necessarily on the same page. So what is the calculus that goes on for you before you decide, you know what, I'm going to put this person on, or I'm going to make a video about this and state some definitive things that I'm pretty sure are accurate?
Whew. That's a very interesting question. I think it's multifactorial. So it's not just one thing. It's like, oh, like, where's this person been on? So let's socially vet him. Okay, well, what about the knowledge criteria? Do I have the knowledge specific to understand, let's say, their PhD? No, right? Because it's not something that I've studied. But I will say there are certain, I think seeing how they communicate in a broader context can be informative into the way that they critically think. And to be clear, when I say, I'm not trying to big ups myself, but some of the prior academic background, while I didn't complete those things, being in certain programs, so being in Gifted or in TOPS or those other things, I'm not unfamiliar, for instance, the third year, with stats or some of those concepts or the things that are being communicated. So it's not completely...
My boy's saying, I'm actually smart as fuck, dog, so it ain't a thing. Understood. Understood, Omar.
So all I'll say, I could bring the
Mensa
transcripts.
Approved. Go ahead,
so
sorry.
What I mean, because I think it would be disingenuous if I don't mention those things. Where, for instance, we were joking when we met up in person. It's like my final exam that I got when I wrote what do you call it? It was calculus for economics and whatnot. I took it in high school. I actually got 100%. And I'm not trying to flex when I say those things, integrals or what have you. But you could see how someone interprets what I'm saying, and why I bring that up is that I could see how someone interprets data, not just by their number crunching, but then how far they take their conclusions, Eric. And I think we both understand that. So I was like, okay, this is the data set. What can we say with confidence here? And how far reaching are we being with our statements? And then how layered are our assumptions? I think that's what it is for me, where you could see. And I think removed from just what they publish, I try and see how they communicate more generally. So if they have a blog post or some of those things, and then you could see that critical thinking behind the scene, and that allows me to better understand their overall thought process, if that makes sense. Because it's not just purely what did they publish. Because like you said, if I was to take a look at that, I don't have Panation angles. Like I'm trying to really interpret that. I haven't been in the research space, right? I'm unaware of these things. But you can say, it's like, okay, so this was the sample size, this is what happened, this is the confidence, this is how statistically significant it was. And then someone's claiming A, B, C, D. You're like, wait a second here. And then there's a few other things to look for, of course, which is when presented with new information. So here, I think, is one of the critical aspects. When presented with new evidence, do their positions change? So how willing are they to change their positions over time, historically? Because then that would indicate to me how potentially stagnant they are with their views, or how entrenched they are from a personal bias standpoint, as opposed to them actually wanting to be about the science objectively. And so you could see the communicators that choose to communicate in the space. And then from there, if you see this small sample size, a small group of people that seem to be open to changing their opinions, that when they communicate, they are quite specific, and they are a little hesitant to make overly conclusive statements. So where it's like, oh, you should never do this. I'm like, oh, that's kind of a red flag, right? Like, you're a science communicator. That's kind of a red flag. So you start to see that, and then you see who they choose to associate with. We're likely, I know it's very unfortunate, and Eric, you could speak on this, those in academia who've been discredited then, right? Where either the research they've published or some of the things, it's very rare that it happens. But okay, these people that seem to be with it, and then from my very small anecdotal experience, what have I seen in the training space? Does that seem to line up? Because you can technically take a look at the data, and there might not be a lot of data, and they can draw a conclusion where I think that's untenable. Like, compared to what I've experienced and what I've seen just training and working with people, like it just seems so separated from reality. So I think when I say it's multifactorial, all those things happen. You don't think about it consciously, like, oh, like, let me take a look at A. Okay, yep, 1, 2, 3. But you tend to see the people who are more willing to change their opinions, the way that they communicate, how they communicate with others, and then who they choose to associate. So it is a little associative when you take a look at that. Okay, so this is someone that they'll cite this researcher often. Well, wait a second. These 5 or 6 people who seem to have a pretty good handle, at least on communicating things and the way that they qualify their statements, or saying that this research, okay, that's someone more notable than someone that potentially might have some of those red flags. So it's kind of that sifting process that occurs with time. And to be clear, like, let's throw the baby under the bus. There's been certain situations, and I could say actually one of the spaces personally, Eric, I think, where there was some mistakes on my end, just not in terms of who I brought on, but not vetting them well enough, would maybe be the rehab space or the physical therapy space, because I think due to, as we spoke about before, one, it's an emerging field. And so we can't say there's certain things when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to training, that we can say more conclusively. And so because, once again, it's an emerging field and there's a lot of unknowns, it's sometimes you do get that rationalization, or you do get some of those things. In my own personal experience, I was like, wait a second, like, my pain narrative, what's going on here? Oh, this thing right here. So you not only can make mistakes, you will make mistakes, and you need to do a reevaluation of your own sorting mechanism over time. So yeah, I've been totally guilty. However,
I love it. I love that you're honest there, and I love also that you didn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. You threw the baby out of the bathwater underneath the bus, and it was yourself. So that's dark, man. But I think that last point is really critical, is that you are aware that you're going to get it wrong, and that you try to learn from that, and that you don't try to pretend you didn't get it wrong in the face of, trying to save face.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was a really salient point, which is great. I think before that, you also made a really good point that goes back to the episode we had with the whole mass crew. Put on your position shoes, take your elemental pre to get psyched up, put on your Rascal shirt, and go out to your local mass store and get a subscription, folks. But in the episode where we discussed rationalism versus empiricism, Greg Nuckols pointed out, hey, you can evaluate the strength of a rationalist argument by the number of logical steps you have to take before you get to the conclusion. And the more steps you take, the more embedded assumptions. And that's essentially something that you have been doing without maybe being able to articulate it as well as Greg did. And I think that's a really important thing, because sometimes it's almost seen as a feature, not a bug. I think, like, if you were to wind it back to the more guru-laden days, if you can lay down 15 steps of metabolism and sound smart, you're more likely to convince people. And I don't want to get into this too deeply, but that's something we've talked about a lot on Iron Culture, that jargon, that nuance can essentially be hand waving in a smokescreen. And if you really know what's going on, you understand that the more complex that narrative needs to be, and the more logical jumps that are based on maybe even solid scientific steps, the more likelihood there is for something to be incorrect. So I think those are 2 really good points. And I also think it goes back to, you do know your audience, and you're not only vetting someone for their scientific knowledge, but also for their ability to communicate it and rationalize it and explain it to the general audience. And a really critical thing you said was about, okay, they may be good at science, but what if it seems totally divorced from reality? And what I took from that is essentially, like, if your data or your conclusions based on that data go directly against anecdotal evidence, then there might be something wrong. There might be something missing, or you might be over concluding. And I do think there are some scientists who are just completely divorced from the fitness trenches, that they're not aware of when that occurs, and it's not something they've actually lived or experienced. Now, hold your horses, audience, because I know what you're thinking is, Eric, but anecdotes can seem to be one way, when in fact we're just looking at correlation. Well, let's just confirm that anecdotes are a form of evidence, but they are a limited form of evidence. And there is one thing they are actually very good at doing, is telling you what's possible. So for example, if we went back into the anti-low carb phase that was the strongest, where everyone, I would say maybe 5 years ago, was basically responding to the pendulum shift of the resurgence of ketogenic diets, and they were just very, the vitriol of being anti-low carb was really, really high. And now you'll hear probably a more accurate representation of the data of saying, look, it's no better. It is a little more restrictive, but there is data to suggest that a low carb diet might suppress hunger a little more, even compared to another, high protein diet. But, if you're doing high volume, or if you're also doing cardio, or if you like to have a little more food variety, probably not a good idea, and certainly not a good long-term strategy, as it doesn't have a whole lot of moderation involved in learning how to eat in the real world. So that type of message wasn't around 5 years ago, and it wasn't uncommon to hear people saying, look, bodybuilders, they eat high carb diets. You can't get shredded by just going low carb. And someone would go, well, anecdotally, I went on a ketogenic diet, and here I am with shredded glutes. I compete, and I may not be the norm, but I exist. And they'd be like, anecdotes don't matter, bro. And I'm like, well, hold on. Anecdotes don't break the laws of physics. If the guy went on a low carb diet and he got shredded, we know it's possible, right? So I think that's the type of thing that you were talking about, Omar. And I think it's an important thing, is that when we so clearly see something that is being done in the quote unquote trenches, and we know that is at least representative of what is possible. We don't know if it's optimal. We don't know if it's the best or second worst approach, but we know that it is viable, and that people are certainly not preventing themselves to getting where they are. That whole discussion of success leaves clues. The only clue it really leaves is that what that person is doing is not preventing their success. So I think sometimes we get so science focused, and scientists are victims of this as well, that they're so out of touch with what's actually occurring and what can occur, that they will claim that certain things are impossible or not viable, when they're actively possible and viable, but they may or may not be indicated in the very controlled data set they have. So all the things you said, I think, are great. And I think that indicates, that helps me understand how you've done such a good job in representing science and communicating in an effective way through not only your own language, but also who you bring on and what they say. So
my turn now. Thank you, Eric, to ask you questions. Whew. Now feels way more comfortable. All right. We can loosen up here. We got that out of the way. I will say, I do think it really does come down to the why. Do you want to help people? And that's why I do think we are both exactly on the same page of the same novel when it comes to this, in that if it's just about servicing yourself, your ego, I'm Mr. Communicator, I'm Mr. Science Communicator, I'm the number one fitness personality or whatnot, is that you almost view it as a threat to have someone else on, where you're trying to think instead where you should be thinking, empathy with the listener, with the viewer, with the subscriber. I want to help you out. I know I don't know nearly enough about this topic. I want to do a deep dive. Let me get the top researcher. So we talk about, let's say, jokingly, creatine. If I want to do a deep dive, I want Darren Candow on there, okay, the lead researcher on creatine, to talk about that, because I want to give only the best information. And then you wrap it in such a way through the editing, subtitles, and the intro, what have you, that maybe if some of the information might be a little too complex, you could then distill it in a more easily understandable way. So there are ways of doing that, but I think it's about servicing the audience, and about, if you're interested in this and you think it's something that's pertinent to them making progress, well, hey, we got to bring it on. And so it was surprising to me, Eric, before when I started on YouTube, that other people did not do that, because it's well, wait a second, they would love to come on, because I forget the guest that we had, but they said often, man, when you're in the ivory tower and you're communicating with your peers and you publish something, it might get viewed only 30, 40 times. What if instead I get invited and I can now communicate this, what I view as valuable information, to 10,000, 20, 30, 50 1 million people? Wow. I would love to. So there are these free resources available of these top professionals that know more than anyone else that are dying to communicate with the masses. It's unthinkable. So my question for you, that was a quick aside. My question for you, now you have the Instagram. If you're not following Helms, you want some hunky photos. Eric's like, you're gonna have to scroll back, man, because I actually try and make it less about myself, and I think you should make it more about you. But that's a conversation for, outside of this Instagram. There's my own personal bias, and then what you think would be best for the people. And I would maintain that I'm part of the people, and I think I have the pulse of the people. So when I say get hunky, just weigh that in, my man. Anyways, Helms3DMJ on Instagram. So now, not only dealing with the ivory tower, but mass communicating with people on a social media platform. My question for you, has it changed how you communicate in the last several years? Because I have heard from certain people, and I think it's not a fair representation, that let's say, Eric, you make a post, and I think this is one of the things. If we were to reduce your position down to merely assessing it by the acolytes that follow you, the fidelity of the information retained is very high. Like, meaning that what they are parroting that you say to other people is pretty damn accurate, right? It's pretty damn true of what the current position is. And I think that comes from a place of an effective communication, you being effective in the way you communicate. It's not just being right, because there are people that are right, but when they try and explain it, and then the audience attempts to explain it to someone else, they get it completely wrong. And so that's not an issue of the information being incorrect, is that the information isn't conveyed correctly or effectively enough, right? So for you, my question, you've had this feedback loop. You've had this opportunity now to get that real world information down on the streets with the folks. You post something, you see what they say, and sometimes there is that person, Eric, where you're like, man, seriously, like I just made this crystal clear post, and you're not even being not only not charitable with your interpretation, but like, how could you get this wrong? But has it shaped the way that you communicate on social media here on Iron Culture, or on other channels when you're writing on, or other podcasts? Have you changed over time, or is it something that pretty much from your inception you've had a pretty good read? Because I would say that I think amongst the science communicators, you rank very highly on this. Like, you're able already to know your audience and communicate, but being on social media, because you were relatively new to social media, like what you started 3 years ago, your Instagram, you're a late
2016.
26, yeah, like that's about 3 years too late. So you're a late bloomer for social media. So how has that changed you and the way that you communicate and then produce content?
Honestly, drastically. Yeah. So when I first got on Instagram, I didn't take it seriously. I just did it because I basically got hassled to do it, and I did it as like, okay, this is a way to like promote the fun side of me, but no one is expecting me to produce content on Instagram. And like my first posts on Instagram were a series on how to out-angle people in pictures as a kind of a joking. Yeah.
That's good. I know, but that's good.
Yeah, the angle game. Yeah. But I don't think I was thinking about, and all right, let me balance that with some reviews of studies or things like that, And I very quickly realized, like, actually, if academics are on Twitter, which restricts your word count more, and the academic arena I'm in of physique sport is so visual, maybe I can actually do this thing. So then I started to think about, all right, how do I do a good job on Instagram? And I did some very, very simple things. I tried to post something of value on a daily basis. And I tried to do it at the peak hours based upon what my metrics said, is when I had most of my followers looking. And that was tremendously successful. I grew a lot. And then I saw the largest uptake when I was doing that during my contest prep, because to be honest, like, yeah, taking your shirt off, being in the middle of it, being in shape, people do want to see you walk the walk, and they like to see stuff like that. And that's really, because it just go to show me how much of a visual medium Instagram is. So, that's when I kind of blew up, and that resulted in, when you have more followers, other people then they see you. So, I think in 2019, God, I was on, Alan Thrall's channel. I was on your channel. We did a bunch of podcasts. I was on Jeff Nippard's channel multiple times. And I just saw how much that if I leveraged that, I could grow my platform tremendously. And it actually scared the shit out of me. I remember when I hit 100K on Instagram, it made me want to post less on Instagram, because it also meant that there was a higher cost to errors I would make. There's a higher cost to if I post in a certain emotional state. Like, for example, I wanted to make a post that showed how extreme natural bodybuilding was. And when I was 3 days out, I took some pictures and basically just totally naked, but just blocking out certain parts of my body so that it wasn't totally naked. And there was a lot of people who did not like that. You know, they were like, "Hey, not safe for work, bro." And I think in the moments I was experiencing like, man, bodybuilding is freaking extreme. You have to get down to like 0% body fat and maintain a job, a family, and life and balance. And that's not easy. And I don't think we talk about that enough. So let me try to create something that's semi-visually shocking to show that. And then after I did it, I was like, I wonder how the rest of the 3DMJ crew felt about that. I wonder how about my AUT colleagues felt about that. And it's another example of make less decisions when you're shredded because you're a little out there. But it really wasn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. And I talked about it afterwards, and I think it produced a good conversation. But it happened at a time where I had a larger platform than I was comfortable with, and I did not like how much scrutiny and potential attention I needed to give it. So it's interesting. I find Instagram is this double-edged sword where it detracts from my overall mission of producing content, but it's also allowed me to have an audience to give that content out to people. So right now, actually, if you've been paying attention to my content in, say, the last 3 to 4 months, it's really pretty crappy, like on Instagram. There's very few, like I don't post daily anymore. I don't even necessarily try to post at the peak time. And a lot of the times it's just like, man, I hope someone produces a podcast that I was a guest on so I have something to say more than once this week. And, like the standard for my Instagram right now is to not post about iron culture 2 days in a row, because that means only one thing happened, and it happened on Monday, right? So far, I've been able to do it like every third post, so I'm doing barely okay. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that there's a reason for that, and that is that my work has increased tremendously at AUT. So a lot of my students, now that the lockdowns are seem to be hopefully, fingers crossed, in the rear view in New Zealand, and all my students who kind of started around the same time have their ethics through, and they're out there piloting and collecting data. They need a lot of help. And I've got new students coming in who have their proposal. So right now, I'm reminding myself that, hey, Instagram is the place where you talk about the things that you're doing and you help people understand and contextualize it. But what you're actually doing, like there's science and there's communication of it. Being a science communicator, when everything's perfectly connected and flowing and there's a good balance between the two, there's equal parts communication and equal parts science. But because I'm not just a science communicator, I'm also a scientist. And I have people who rely on me, whether they're my handful of clients, whether they're my handful of students, whether they're my colleagues at Mass, whether they're my colleagues at 3DMJ, whether it's you, et cetera, all the people I work with. I have come to accept that it's okay for me to basically take my foot off the gas on social media and just do the work and then get ahead of it, produce more things, learn, and then go back to communicating it. So people will notice that I'm streaky when it comes to when I produce stuff. Like right after my PhD, when I had published all this work and done all this work on RPE, I mean, that's what I was talking about from like 2015 till 2018, pretty intensely. There's been periods where, depending on what a student of mine's doing or what Dr. Zerdos is doing and I what are collaborating on, et cetera, they'll hear me talk about that topic a lot. So that's one thing I've come to learn is, and I haven't figured it out yet, is try to find the right balance between being on social media and establishing a platform and having that not actually directly like retract from my ability to actually produce science. Because I would say even neurocognitively, being on social media is something very different from what you need to do in research. You need to be intensely focused for hours at a time, looking at someone's grammar while I'm, writing a manuscript and looking up, papers like, oh, they cited this one. Is this the best citation? Did they actually say that? Let me find the full text. Oh, they don't have it. Let me do an interlibrary loan. Okay, I'll get that tomorrow. Let me go to the next thing. I think we should reorder it. That's deep work. And the way I feel like my brain starts to operate after I've been on email, social media, and all these other things, it gets very good at splitting my attention. And all of a sudden I can't do the deep work as effectively or as efficiently, I should say. So finding that balance is tricky. And a big part of that for me has been just being emotionally okay with me just reposting podcasts and posting up my workouts for months at a time while I'm focused on other things and doing, and appearing on podcasts, appearing on people's YouTube channels to just stay relevant. Like you said, the frequent flyer miles thing, that's been a blessing in disguise. The fact that people just hit me up. Like if I don't do anything, people hit me up and it kind of keeps the wheel spinning for me, even when my foot's totally off the gas. People will ask me to come on their channel. People will ask me to be on a podcast. And I kind of can keep that relevance going while I'm doing work that is, I guess, in the dark, quote unquote, as far as social media is concerned. So that's a big thing I've learned. To answer your question about the challenges of what I'm saying being interpreted properly, that's an ever going process. And I think a lot of the times it goes back to what we started with, of knowing your audience and then knowing the appropriate level to give that information on. The most recent 3DMJ podcast episode that I was on, the whole topic was about helping the listener understand what information is relevant to them. And we actually had an internal 3DMJ meeting where we discussed the possibility, although we didn't go through with it, with labeling certain podcast episodes as for competitors or for general lifters, because a lot of the times we have assumptions that, okay, this is the 3DMJ podcast. It's Jeff Alberts and me and Brad and Berto talking. We're obviously talking about competitive bodybuilding here, but we've had people write in and be like, oh, do I need to do the recovery diet after my diet? And I'm like, oh, did you just finish a season? Oh, I don't compete. And like the cop-out answer is, that idiot didn't listen. The real answer is, we weren't discerning enough and specific enough and didn't provide the disclaimers so that people could understand who we were talking to and how it could be relevant for everyone. So that I think that needs to be something you're always cognizant of. And I think it is a cop-out just to be like, hey man, if you don't get it, look, I can give you the information, but I can't understand it for you, dummy,
Yeah.
So I try not to do that. That said, there are times when you have to kind of draw a line in the sand and be like, well, look, and my response to a lot of people when they get something wholly wrong as far as their interpretation of what I've said on social media is I direct them to more deep content. I say, hey, check out Iron Culture episode blank. Or, hey, check out if you're okay with watching an S3 portrait mode video recording from 2013, check out my pyramid videos. And, if you don't mind dropping coin, maybe get my books. Because if you're that confused, the way I solve that is not by, an Instagram comment. It's by you really engaging with what I have. So I try to give them free options first, and then I secondly, just pimp my shit and try to keep living that life where I'm building more ivory towers on top of pyramids. So that's part of it. Another thing I've learned is that a large sector of the fitness community likes to see Godzilla fight King Kong. Oh, yeah. They know, and podcasters realize that controversy sells. So I've been numerous times positioned as the counterpoint to someone else, and I found that I'm mostly misinterpreted and most egregiously misinterpreted and had my message oversimplified in those discussions. And I think this is a very natural and human thing to do, that once they've been presented with a viewpoint on a topic, those viewpoints are normally counter or opposed to something else. Someone normally describes what they are for by describing what they are not for. We see this all the time in politics, right? And what that ends up producing is, if not A, then B, very natural human heuristic, which is actually wrong most of the time. So if I come in and I go, hey, everyone, hold on. When we're talking about volume progression, we need to be cognizant that if we keep increasing sets every week, and if we do it in the way I'm describing, which doesn't necessarily represent this other person's position, that can really get you doing far too much really quickly. And that it is not actually volume that is the key physiological thing that is producing growth. It is the proximity to failure and having actually lifting weights progressively. And then we need to think about the volume of that over time and how it's distributed. And what might be heard is, so you don't think we should ever increase sets within a mesocycle? And I go, oh, that's grossly misinterpreted. So I think I've come to realize that if I do decide to enter a point-counterpoint situation, or if I debate someone, I should expect to be misinterpreted and need to give more context to people, and that I should really only directly oppose something vehemently if I think it's really just totally wrong. And that I find comfortable. If I'm going to debate someone, I have to acknowledge and be comfortable enough that it will require more work from me to change the perception that people will see me as the polar opposite of what I'm opposing. And that's probably one of the reasons why I don't often, although it does seem like it sometimes, get into these true debates where I take the alternative side, because it tends to short circuit people's critical thinking.
Eric, what a fantastic answer. And I'm going to say it. My man, there are a few things I want to say, but one, I'm quite proud of us because we knew from the inception of Iron Culture that if we started some controversy, if we did debate videos, if we invited this person, if we had those juicy titles, that they would get more clicks, more views, and that we would basically be part of that fame monster. So here's the perk. A lot more exposure. So it's a pro and con. It's like, is this about to be a Pyrrhic victory here? It's like we win, but at what cost? Does it change us irrevocably, where we can no longer look at ourselves the same in the mirror and we think, who's that man in the mirror? Where you can get much greater exposure, but then what's that fidelity of the information? How are people interpreting the information? Who is watching now this information, right? And so I think the best pocket to be in, that we both feel, I think it's just our personalities, is to be underrated versus overrated. Meaning that someone has to almost find you, or someone almost, well, wait a second, oh no, you want the real insights? You got to check out either Iron Culture or what have you, because you're right. Those juicy headlines, and we can give the exact same examples when it relates to thumbnails, topics that you want to cover. So, the content cycle, Eric, like, here are some easy wins. Several years ago, there was a kid who was told to stop deadlifting at a commercial gym. It's like, wow, like, why? And the guy was a complete asshole to the kid. But this is like an easy win because everyone can get behind this, right? It's like you ask the average citizen, hey, do you want the government to privately survey you, in your house, everywhere you go and whatnot? And of course, we all say, yes, we want to sign up for this, right? 99% of us, we said, yeah, we will give our control over to our authoritarian government. It's only natural.
I'm an only child. I've always wanted a big brother. So
yeah. Big brother's watching me. Eric's like, oh, where is he? Can I wave at him?
Will they play catch with me?
That's like someone joked one time we're gonna go to this Airbnb. It's like, man, I think this shit's haunted. It's like, it's okay. I get lonely at night, man. Like I can't sleep. I have insomnia. Like you want to haunt me? I need someone to talk to. Let me tell you about my problems. The ghost is
we'll
just
see
like,
who
nope.
really gets haunted. Yeah.
The ghost is like, I think I overstepped my bounds here. So I do think there is power to being for real underrated, and we're both very aware of this because it allows you to remain your true self. You don't have to make those compromises, and it can almost be 1,000 tiny cuts. So when that kid, was told to stop deadlifting, it's an easy win because everyone can get behind it. So you make the video, it's timely, it's topical, it's relevant, it's going to be in that content cycle, it's going to get shared. So that's an example, and I'm not saying that's wrong to do that at all, but we know, as you said, controversy sells. You only have to take a look online, any political disagreement where people get really enraged. This is my position. This position is so dumb. I can't wait for this. They thrive off of conflict and off of the vitriol of what people say. If instead it's like, well, wait a second. Let's think about these things. Well, what would I change? What are we really talking about here? Okay, well, can we somehow have, by the end of the conversation, a mutual understanding of one's position so that we could better understand not only each other, but then how to say it to the audience? That's interesting. So a conversation rather than a competition. And I think being underrated, so us choosing this podcast not to go after those things, because let's put it this way, Eric, you could drop the science hammer. There's been numerous, I will say maybe charlatans over the last few years. Okay, like, man, this individual's putting out really bad information. Oh, let's pit it. It's Eric, the science guy, against X. You're going to do a fantastic job just breaking down what they're saying. We're right. We're team good guys, right? Because we're always right. We're clear. We got the. Oh man, Eric's like I could see that minute 44. Eric's about to drop that meta analysis. Like, they ain't ready for this. Here comes the Uno card, Uno reversal. That's starkly different than what's best for the audience. And as you just said, and I think one of the things, like, it just doesn't sit right with you. When you participate in those things, it gets 30,000 views, but out of those 30,000 people, how well are they digesting that information? So man, that's a huge point right there that I think can't be understated. And I'll just say for myself, one, the concept of streaking, which I support for you, is I think something very powerful. It's very powerful, Eric, because check this out. This is my evaluation of you. You've built up a considerable amount of clout in academics and also in just the overall fitness industry, that if you put your foot off the gas pedal, it's completely fine because you're very desirable, right? There's just one Eric Helms, and I'm not trying to say it in that way, but there is a high demand for you. So taking 6 months off of, choosing on Instagram, hey, like, let's talk about refeeds. Let me give you an infographic here. It's like, man, I got students, I got mass, I got this podcast, I got all these commitments, I got my family, it's very understandable. I think one of the pressures of social media that I'm now even attempting to reevaluate for myself is the lack of permanence, man. You make some content, it's here today, gone later today. And this is this is basically so to give an evaluation of myself, I got stuck in that kind of cycle where the generation I came from, a YouTube video would be basically relevant for a year, maybe 2 years, and then it's gone. So you will make, and the way that I viewed my channel, Eric, I'm kind of like your high school teacher that's teaching these topics, and this is the scope of what I'll be talking about. And every few years, because the audience, the kids leave and a new audience comes in, can I take the same topics, spruce them up a little bit, maybe revisit them, reskin them, make them a little bit better, and produce that same content? Because hey, I've seen this before. It's like, you followed my content for 3 to 4 years. You learned everything you want to learn. There's kids that have now, in the 10, 11 year process, have attained PhDs or what have you. So it's not for you, right? This is high school, right? When you want to go to university, you go to university, like you go to Mass, like you get the Mass subscription. And now, recently for myself, that's why I took basically a year away from making content. When I come back, I want to be, when I say my more true self, I want to get a little bit more creative. I want to reimagine and reshape the way that I do things, because I was stuck for 10 years consistently producing content because of that perceived lack of permanence. So I think it's very powerful to know when you have it, to strike when the iron's hot, and for you to have that self-awareness, because what someone just listening to this might not understand, you see like, oh, I'm growing, now I'm not growing. And it's not just, oh my gosh, I want all of these followers, but it is thinking, okay, like, will I still have an audience to communicate to, because I might have some valuable things to say a year from now, or will I just drop off? And I think, Eric, my view of social media from 10 years ago, it is a lot more stable than it was. When I say, like, I could name 10 people right now that not no one listening, but there's a highly unlikely chance anyone would be aware of, because they were a flash in the pan before there were all the different types of social media. So when I started, there's YouTube. Maybe if you wanted a blog, you could blog. And now it's maybe Twitter, but now there's YouTube, there's Instagram. Hell, you can't even, I don't know how you communicate really on Snapchat, but it's possible, right? You could have a podcast, the TikTok crew. There are many different ways. And even Twitter, once again, being used as a referral for other things that you publish. It's possible, right? And you can have email. So Mass has, emails they'll send out so people are made aware of things. So it is a far more inclusive environment where someone can stay inside that environment more easily than 10 years ago. So I think that's very astute on your part to have that self-awareness. Like, yeah, man, I'm actually busy. I'm not going to, rather than I might put out C or B content right now, but I'm not going to tear my hair out over the fact that I'm not putting out A content right now. Because guess what? I'm a professional. I'm helping out my students, and I have all these other commitments.
Yeah, and I think that's the urgency that social media is designed to give you, that sense, is very different. I mean, it's almost required that if something's always going on, that means the stuff is not permanent. That means that your post that you put a ton of energy into creating this infographic, people aren't going to see it a year from now. But if you put that same infographic in a blog post, it won't get the same like launch cycle that you will see. It won't get that huge hit initially, but people will be reading it 6 years from now. Like, we still get comments on our blog posts that I wrote a long time. I've forgotten a blog post exists until I get a comment on it. I'm like, oh shit, like maybe we should delete that, But there are certainly, I think a huge part of kind of, we're going to go back to the topic here of being a good content creator is know your medium. I do worry when I see people who spend a ton of time producing high quality evidence-based content that they deliver on Instagram through infographics and things, because I know they're just going to have to recycle those to keep them seen by the type of audience they want. So I do think probably the best use of one's time is to figure out what's the minimum standard of content and information and posting frequency they can put on Instagram so that they can actually create, podcasts or blogs that are long form that will be around. Like, I'm going to do it. Someone who's great at this, who is present on social media, keeps you aware of who they are, but puts almost all their time and energy into long form content that does not grow stale, is Danny Lennon. Like with Sigma Nutrition Radio,
Yeah.
If I want to learn about some topic, I'm happy to go back to 2015, 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And speaking of an underdog, he's also that. Like, I think a lot of people will sometimes just come out and try to to blast and get a lot of attention while they're also creating the real work. And I think that can sometimes, downplay their message, or they create a caricature of themselves. Like, for example, the Zodiac Killer. That's a serial killer who would write constantly to the San Francisco press to get attention when the real work they were doing was the actual murders. Now, Danny Lennon does not do that.
No.
For him, active serial killer, he keeps that in the dark. That's the real work. And then if you want to see anything about that, you can't. You have to hear about it here on Iron Culture, because what he's primarily doing is just Sigma Nutrition Radio. He's okay knowing who he is deep down, a serial killer, and doing that work. And he's not going to be writing anyone. There's no articles going out to any media outlets.
No.
He's doing the work in the dark, literally. And then he also does his podcast. So if you want to understand as a content creator how to have a viable long-term career of serial murder while also educating the masses about nutrition, shout out Danny Lennon. But anyway, I got a little off topic there, but the main point I wanted to make was that I think it's really important to match your skill set, what you enjoy, what you're efficient at creating, and the content, the audience, and the message you're trying to put out with the time and the proportion of energy spent on different platforms. Like, I'm not going to get off Instagram completely, because it does allow me to kind of keep my ear to the ground and stay, in the mind's eye of the collective fitness industry. But my energy and effort and time is going into published research, my books, blogs, and podcasts, where I can really get the kind of nuance I want to get across.
Eric, real quick, speaking about your book, so Muscle Strength Pyramids, I think they're absolute must-haves for anyone that want to understand the fundamentals, really, when it comes to lifting. It amuses me, and sometimes I think it is familiarity breeds a sense of, oh, I know this person, the perception of value, this information is all free, but why would I pay for it then? It's like, well, it's all easily collected in one place. I'm providing all this information for you because I genuinely enjoy doing it, but you probably would have far more takeaways if you just simply picked it up. But it's amusing to me because if any other field, so let's say you're a doctor or name any hard science, and you had the ability to communicate with like the best in the field and ask them a question, not that you'd want to reciprocate then moral reciprocity, like, hey, they helped me out, therefore I'm going to support them. It's like, oh, they got a lot of really good information. Well, they collected their best information in this book, I'm going to get it. It always amuses me where someone will want, and I get it could be a financial concern, but however, this is where I'm the staunch capitalist here, and this is where, once again, accumulating our wealth betwixt us, it is very affordable, right? And so when someone will ask a question and then they'll say this, and then you'll direct them to maybe the Muscle Strength Pyramids, which is where they'd go to get the information. It's like, oh, thanks, maybe I'll check it out, and they're not going to get it. Like, I understand that, but the familiarity where it's like you're talking to Eric Helms, the guy who published also research. What a privilege in our space, right? Because there's not other spaces where you have that ability to easily communicate with someone. Like, oh, you want to know about periodization? Like Eric just made a post. You can actually ask him a question. It's just mind-blowing to me because 10 years ago, some of this coveted information, it almost wouldn't be secretive, Eric, but there's an understanding that there's a cost associated to then learn because it wasn't available. The knowledge asymmetry was there, right? It was within a relatively select few hands, and those people were too busy publishing research. So if you wanted to know better, there's that whole story of Chip Conrad, one of our favorite episodes, where Mel Siff, who published Super Training, where he stayed at his house, like he interned with him. It was this whole like he had to seek out the guru, right? He had to find him. He had to live at his estate for a while. He, in order to absorb all this information, it's not just oh that's the guy, that's Eric. He knows all this information. Follow. Oh, let me ask him a question. Like he published his research. I'm gonna ask him a question that's also gonna betray the fact that I actually haven't followed enough of his content to understand some of the fundamentals. He's going to reference me to pick up his muscle and strength pyramids, which will help me out, and it's the shortest way, it's the easy way. And then I'm not going to do it. I'm like, oh, come on. It's like, if only you knew, my dude, how easy it is for you in 2021 to attain this information. And sometimes in that hero's quest, Eric, all I'm wondering is when you don't even have to slay the dragon, where the dragon's like, bro, just kill me right here. Like, I'm good. You want the gold? Like, don't even worry about it. Because you haven't gone on that mythological journey, you're not even aware potentially of the value that you're getting, of the thing that you seek, because it's so easy for you to attain. And that's just me from being 10 years ago, like this ability, like me in this time frame where I know if I'm producing content, if I had a question like, Eric, I could just ask you it. I get it. That's highly valuable, right? That information. I think just some of these new kids on the block don't understand that.
I love it. I have this image of 1,000 years ago. There's this unique sect of Buddhist monks living at the top of this mountain.
No,
and
not a pyramid.
They would meditate on, no, because they're going to get their asses sued. And they would meditate on the meaning of life and give advice to people. But you'd have to camp and go up this mountain and think about what you wanted to ask and learn about these Buddhist monks. But now they have an Instagram. And you can just hit like, phone call. And it's like, hey, what do you think what I should have for breakfast today? Like, you got any feeling on that? Does the Tao Te Ching give anything on that? And they're like, no. Like, what do you, all right. Well, don't worry about it. I just found you guys on Yelp anyway recently. I heard you give good advice. Not going to give you 5 stars, but whatevs. There's I guess with access comes maybe not necessarily the requirement of understanding what has gone into that information. And that's not even really anyone's fault. It's like, as someone who's trying to provide information, I want to be accessible. I want to have a larger platform. But that causes problems. Like, I physically cannot do all the things I need to do in my life while staying up with my DM requests on Facebook Messenger or Instagram anymore. And that was a decision I made about 2 years ago. It's like, I'm just not going to open that anymore. I can't. I physically cannot, because there's too much. And there are certain questions on Instagram where I look at, I start to respond, I delete it, and I go, I'm not even going to get enough characters here. I can't give them enough context. All right, let me think first. Now I've changed the way I think about it. Have I done anything on this topic before? And it may feel like a cop-out to the other person, but it's the best solution I have for balancing my work and life, while also giving them something useful if they are going to pursue it. And if they aren't going to pursue it, that's okay, because that just means that the calculus for them, it isn't that important to them yet.
Yeah.
They were hoping for a quick and easy answer. They may not be aware of what's going on in my life, because like you said, they don't actually follow my stuff that much. I was just an easy recommendation that got tagged on Instagram. Oh, this guy seems smart. Oh, this guy had a good post. Oh, maybe he's got a good physique. Like, I just big up myself there. I'll just ask him a question.
You have a great
Instead
physique.
of previously, thank you, people would find me, and to find me, since I was a much more niche person, they would probably have a better understanding of why they found me and what they found me for. So I don't blame anybody. I just think I need to be aware of how people are finding me and why those questions come across, so that I don't try to put this mountain full of effort into it, where they're not even necessarily looking for that in-depth of an answer, or they aren't even ready to hear it. Like, it's not my responsibility for someone who's casually found me to retool their entire education and foundation of knowledge so that they can move forward, when maybe they don't even have that level of commitment yet. So yeah, that's a lesson I've definitely had to learn.
Look, we will take their ambivalence. It's okay. And we'll understand that we can't hate the player. It's about the game. And to that point, Eric, just real quick, what I would say is that my thought process now is I used to respond like years ago, any YouTube comment, because I'm just like, hey, man, look, you took the time to leave a comment. I'm going to do my best to respond. And when you add up that time, I do think it's important, because it keeps you grounded with the everyday concerns. And so that can be informative also of the content you want to produce. So there is value, one, for the person, then for you as a content creator. But then the way I thought about it, which is the truth, is, man, if you take that time and you it's like 2-3 hours, and then you make another video that will be seen by 100,000 people, as opposed to answering in the 2 to 3 hours 70 people. Well, wait a second. So now you're trying to balance these things out. So I think these are all the concerns. Well, preserving your energy, enjoying what you're doing, and not feeling also burnt out, because you're Eric, you're an extrovert, I would say, and so it's like you actually have more energy not to communicate with people, but people might not even be aware of how much it takes from someone. And so if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, no, I got to do all these other things, I can only imagine then what other people would experience and what they would feel. So it is a line that you have to decide for yourself along the way.
No, that's well said. And I think it's interesting now we've basically gone from the start of how we began on this journey to now our current concerns now in 2021.
Yeah.
I don't even think we did it on purpose. We just sync up like that.
Mm-hmm.
Our hormonal cycles are in sync. Just even across time zones and physical locations on different days, technically, as it is Wednesday here. And as I always say, and I mean it, the future's bright, Omar. You're gonna
Our
enjoy
future's
tomorrow.
bright. Yeah, like specifically.
Well, my future's bright, and I'm tomorrow, so I think your future's going to be bright as well. But you do live in a wholly different environment than me, so I don't know what the weather's going to be like. Not my fault. Not a weatherman, folks. All right, I do exercise science, not meteorology. But to bring it back, I think we've taken people on a journey. We've given people two different perspectives on, like you said, same book, same page, maybe different paragraphs. I think kind of different perspectives on the same domain of knowledge with slightly different audiences, with a slightly different intent, but very much simpatico. And you, on Iron Culture, you're seeing kind of the blending of those two approaches and how we've tried to be complementary. But also, you've got a little insight into the challenges we've had, the mistakes we've made, the things we attribute our success to. Hopefully we're right. I don't know. But if you are trying to create some content, we hope there was some nuggets that we dropped on you that were actually helpful.
Eric, as always, so well said. And it is amazing for me to think of some of the similarities. Like, even when we joke, it's like, who watched the film? What is it called? Is it called Carnosaur or Carnosaurus?
Carnosaur.
Oh, man. Yeah, and what is the basic plot, just for those that, because I got to bring it back. I know we talked about this in season 1, but we haven't spoke about it yet. Just the fact that we've seen the same shitty movies that have scarred both of us. Like, it's always amusing. It's like, yeah, like we both started off as trainers, which isn't uncommon, but the conclusions that we derived from that experience that led us to now, wow. So Eric, just real quick for everyone that's listening, because we got to look, Fellini, Tarkovsky, Kurosawa, no. We're talking now about Carnosaur. Go ahead. What's the basic plot line? Because I was like 3 when I saw it. I don't know if I absorbed much, but it did scar me.
And I think I was 8, because we're not that different in age. And the main memory I have is seeing a small, either pro-compy or baby velociraptor, like rip the guts out of somebody for 5 minutes, like it's a zombie movie. But it was basically the horror version of Jurassic Park.
Yes.
And the plot was, let's put it this way. It was a pre-social media time, because that means that Michael Crichton and the producers of Jurassic Park couldn't find out about this movie to sue the producers, because honestly, it's the exact same plot. Scientists mucking around, bringing back dinosaurs, and shit goes bad and people die. That's essentially the plot. But just grosser and with more blood. And basically, most of their budget probably went to not animatronics, but rather, red corn syrup. So
yeah, hey, if anyone's looking for a Friday night movie to watch, don't watch Carnosaur. But if you want to understand us better and every choice we've made since being 3 and 8, it's probably a pretty good idea. I will say to everyone listening that we appreciate you as always, and it is always very cool that we can have these episodes. We could do the deep dives when it comes to science, where we can have people, contemporaries in the cultural sphere that we participate in, so powerlifters, bodybuilders, all those things, and provide a plethora of different experiences, I would almost say, Eric, where it's not just like, this is a science-based podcast, like we're only going to communicate, like this is our frame, that we could be kind of nebulous. So I really appreciate that, man. I appreciate the audience. If they want to show that reciprocity, no pressure, you could go ahead, because we will read. So Eric, we're recording a podcast tomorrow, which will be, you know, a week after this episode for them when they listen to it. But we will read the reviews, and I have it on good authority, Eric, that there is one person that left a review who's totally not you or anyone you're associated with. I don't know what rating it is, so we're going to find that out. We will read some of those rating reviews on iTunes. That's where they collect all that information. On YouTube, if you want to leave a comment, we'll do our best to respond. And we'll see everyone every single Monday from now until, you know.